excited today because I have Dan and Dawn on my show. And you probably might have heard of us. You should have heard of them because they go under the name Erotic Awakening.
Erotic Awakening.
Well, I found them because they posted that they were married for 21 years and they were also in a power exchange relationship for 21 years, which sparked my interest because that was something that I would like to achieve one day. And I'm just really curious. So I asked them a few questions and then we started to talk, and then I invited them on my YouTube channel because I would love to hear what's their secret. So let's first start. Like, would you be willing to introduce yourselves?
Absolutely. And I'll even point out to start, we've been in a power exchange relationship for about 22 years, married for about 21. So we started as a power exchange relationship, and then for romantic loving, well, actually for legal reasons, we went ahead and did the marriage certificate as well. So my name's Dan and this is Dawn. Like you mentioned, we've been in the power exchange relationship for about 22 years now. We've been very fortunate during that time to get to travel across North America, at least, and actually do a lot of presenting on power exchange. When we got started in a place called Columbus, Ohio, and there wasn't a lot of power exchange there. So we were raised, so to speak, by our local leather group, by our kink groups, but neither one of those were quite the kind of relationship that we were looking for. So we started a power exchange relationship, and we had two other couples that were brand new to power exchange relationship. And between the three of us, we kind of between the three couples, we built a group and we started to build the foundation of our relationship.
Right. So we had read a lot of, the internet was still a baby at that point. So it was really hard to do research. But we had fantasy books like The Claiming of Sleeping Beauty and The Story of O and The Marketplace and, all this fantasy stuff that makes you tingle. And it's like, I want to build something like that. We had vanilla relationships before. We didn't want that again. Right. So we did a lot of talking over what we would like, what could literally, what we could turn into reality from the fantasy books. We did a little bit of research. God, was Google even a thing then? We were doing IRC rooms, right? So this is the chat rooms, which I miss. And so we kind of like put all these little pieces together that we liked and kind of created our own thing because we didn't have role models.
And it's very much a designer relationship that we've built, right? Instead of taking the models of here's what man and wife looks like, we said, well, that's fine, but it's not been effective for either one of us so far. What do you really want out of a relationship? And it was a much longer conversation than this, but Dawn said, what I really want is to submit to a strong leader. And what I said was, I want to lead a relationship and really, be responsible for that relationship, but I want somebody to take care of me. And from there, we started to learn the language, and here we are 20 years later.
And during that time, we've written books, we've produced events. We have the Erotic Awakening podcast, which it's 14 years old next week. So over 600 shows. And yeah, you could say this is our passion.
Yeah. So how did you, because if you still had to figure everything out, does that mean that you met each other before you started the power exchange relationship?
For us, our story's a little weird, but yeah, we had known each other as friends long before this. So while we were married to other people, we've known each other since high school, and we're married to other people. And when our marriages fell apart because they didn't work for us, right? I was not happy in a vanilla relationship. He wasn't happy in his. Our vanilla marriages fell apart. We got divorced, and we were working together at the same company and started talking. And it's like, yeah, this is what went wrong. I just couldn't get him to do this when I found out that kink is what I liked, and, things like that. And he's like, oh, same thing happened to me. And we started sharing our porn collection, realized we had collected the same pictures, and our pictures had to do with power exchange, and we didn't even know the word for it. But the hot pictures for us were of the girl kneeling, fully clothed, and she's kneeling, and another woman's got her hand wrapped in her hair, and that look in their faces
Yeah, I know what you're
as
talking about.
yeah, that was the hot stuff, and that was the pictures that we had, and so we had to start talking.
So you actually kind of started with a mutual interest. So you weren't exactly then exploring whether or not you would like to start dating.
Yeah, I think we started, as Dawn mentioned, with that common interest in what we thought was just going to be kinky fun. We thought it was just going to be hot sex that had a power exchange aspect to it. And we would take weekends of being in these, what we thought of at the time as roles and power exchange roles, right?
Right.
And
we even had code words. So when Dan said the code word, it was like, oh, we're in that this weekend. Woohoo.
And what happened for us was the weekend would end, the sexy times would end, but we found that going back to a more vanilla relationship started to feel like the role, and the power exchange aspect started to feel more like the natural, aspect of it. There's it's great to have somebody in a power exchange, to lead a power exchange relationship and maybe to say, oh, give me the oral sex, right? But then when I would say something like, make me a cheese sandwich, I would still get that same kind of, oh, isn't that interesting? I can make her do things. I can make her do things like that. And
Also
that exchange of energy comes back from that as well.
Yeah, and it's also giving her energy as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good that you have the energy, but it should work both ways. Exactly. So because I mean, the last thing that I would, of course, want is to advocate for just leave your vanilla partner. Would you say that the fact that you missed this specific part in your relationship is that the thing that made your relationship fail? I know it's a personal question.
Well, for me, I was learning to find my authentic self and speaking up for my authentic self and what I needed. And we had been together for 14 years, but we got together because he rescued me from my toxic family parents, right? I was dating him at the time, turned 18, needed to get out. He was available, and he was my knight. I'm not cutting him down at all about this, right? And then we moved in together. The parents had a conniption fit, the grandparents. So we got married. And once we were married, it's like, well, we might as well have kids. And, it kind of rolled into that. Neither one of us had really, me or him, had looked at what we really wanted out of relationship. We weren't taught that. So as I started to learn more about myself and just experiencing things and learning what was out there, it wasn't what he wanted. So we were conflicted. We butted heads on some stuff, and I found out that it was a need, not a want, and it just didn't work for him. So so for us, that was the right decision to make. It was a hard decision. We had kids.
Yeah, exactly. I can imagine.
So, but there were some decisions that he had made for himself of his needs that did not match mine. And so it just wasn't going to work any longer, and have anyone be happy.
Yeah.
What was the exact thing that I would like to get a little bit deeper in? Can you, when you look back, can you say what exactly was it? Because there's a lot to power exchange, right? There's a lot of aspects in it. I mean, I also got from a vanilla relationship, but I wasn't aware that this was what I wanted. But for me, it was a trust issue. That was very important, trust and growth, which I have now. So that's for me the main thing. So is there anything that, because I think it's what you're expressing is actually that you didn't match anymore on your core values, actually. So can you see that when you look back, like this is the type of core values that I was missing, and that because what you express is actually that was both sides, right?
Right. So
for mine,
right,
it was simply that we were doing what you see portray normal couples seeing, right? I would say one thing and then she would get mad about that. So I wouldn't say that thing anymore. Or I would argue and we would argue until somebody got tired of arguing.
Oh,
I
yeah,
told
that was
the,
big.
I told my ex-wife that I never wanted to have children before we got married. And she said, okay. And then after we got married, she's changed her tune. And she said, now that we're married, right, we're going to take a different direction on this. But I hadn't changed. So there was a lot of what we see modeled as normal relationship stuff that struck me as kind of a waste of time. We get mad at each other occasionally because we've been together 20 years, Dawn and I, but we don't have arguments per se. We don't have these long drawn out, well, you said, he said, she said. Instead, I take responsibility. I get a little grumpy, right? Because I'm a human being, but then I take responsibility and say, all right, we're done having this argument. Now let's work on a solution, right? And now let's move forward. We're both very growth orientated people. And that was something that was missing from my previous relationship. It was, play the games that we were raised to play. And it just didn't satisfy me. It wasn't good enough.
Yeah, I talk about it in both of our books as well, that whole playing chess. I don't like the playing chess game. I don't like, all right, well, you won last
sacrificing my
time.
queen so I can win your 2 towers, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Relationship. I give in on one piece and then I can win this argument.
Exactly.
And I want to be right. And so, right, I get it. If you're fighting now, when you're fighting, I mean, I guess you fight also every now and then.
It's rare, but it can happen.
How does that work? For in a power exchange, can you fight as equals? Can you understand what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where we recognize that things have become unstable because we do fight as equals. Now, until we realize what the hell we're doing. Right now, the nice thing about this is these arguments, these fights that we have, they are momentary. We're talking about
rare.
minutes instead of hours.
Yeah.
Right. And then one of us recognizes that I don't want to say that we're, the reality is we are human beings. We are together in a 30-foot box, right? Because we live in an RV.
Your buttons are close to the surface, so to say.
Yes.
Exactly, right? And we respect each other enough not to push those buttons on purpose. But sometimes you just have a bad day. Sometimes it's just biology. For me, if I drink too much espresso, I get grumpy.
He's a grumpy espresso drinker. Yes.
So you try not to take it personally. That's the first aspect of it, is to recognize, don't take shit personally. Just because I'm grumpy doesn't mean that Dawn has to say, oh my God, what's wrong? What's going on?
Or what did I do?
Or
that was the old,
which is our native response as we
what did I do and how can I fix it? Oh, wait a minute.
And what happens generally after those initial emotions arise, Dawn either becomes more submissive and quiet and waits for me to get my shit together. And then I say, we are done arguing now. We're done fighting. Here's what I perceive the issue to be. What do you perceive the issue to be? We share whatever the issue is, and then I make a decision and say, okay, from now on, moving forward, I will communicate in this way, or I will expect you to do this instead of what you've been doing. And then boom, fight's over.
And sometimes it's not that eloquent. Sometimes he'll say something, I'll respond in a so not submissive way, right? And he can just look at me and go, no. Right? And I'm like, oh, I did that thing, didn't I? That was not cool. No. So, because I don't want to respond that way. That's old Dawn, an old vanilla relationship that I hated. I don't like responding that way. And when that old pattern comes out, I mean, he can just nip it in the bud by saying no or kneel or whatever.
Do you still feel, if he does that, do you still feel that your authenticity is still in place, that there is a space for you and how you feel.
Yeah, I think so. Dan is very good about letting me have voice. God, what words to use? I'm allowed to have voice, but not to the extent that it's going to damage our power exchange relationship.
Exactly.
Right. So one of my big things when we first got together was that whole fear of being an oppressed woman, not allowed to have, be powerful and empowered and have voice. I mean, I just got out of a 14-year relationship where I didn't feel like I had voice unless it was very loud and argumentative.
Exactly.
So
it's either 0 or 100. There's
exactly,
nothing.
exactly. So Dan actually created a space for me to have voice, and we can go all the way to porch time if you want to talk about that, where I know I can have voice. But part of my authenticity is also being submissive to him. So for him to say kneel, that's actually very empowering for me to be able to just drop to my knees and kneel. That's my seat of power. And that's where I can take a breath. And I know he's taking care of me when he tells me to kneel in that situation, instead of yelling back at me, which would have been the old relationship.
I would like to talk about porch time, but I think it's very powerful. And I think we have something similar. It was so funny because I was reading your book and you were talking about the talking stick. I mean, I can get eyes there. And I just made a video about it. I posted it last week because to me, it's one of the most powerful. I'm doing team trainings in my vanilla life. And I use the talking stick there as well. I think it's so powerful for anything. So it was so exciting to see that you actually use it, because is that what you mean with porch time? That you actually have like a safe space where you can like get out, because you're in a 24/7 power exchange, right? So there is no, so you have to create something like a place where you can then be equals.
We're big fans of this idea that if you're going to be in a 24/7 power exchange relationship, then you don't take breaks because things get messy.
No, right.
Right. We know people that do that, and
inconvenient suddenly. Exactly. Yeah.
Right. It does not seem, I don't know, in a lot of long-term relationships that can go power exchange and then turn it off and then turn it on, turn it off.
Yeah, it's our foundation. So we concentrate on keeping that.
But what we do have is this thing called porch time, where it is like the emergency exit on a plane or something like that, where Dawn or I can say, all right, time for porch time. And we literally, it becomes, we used to have an actual porch, but we find a space as soon as possible. And this becomes sacred space where there's no rules, there's no roles, there's no leader, no follower. Anyone is allowed to speak anything that they want to speak. And the other person's job is to become a witness to what they're saying and nothing more. So we try to avoid using language about you, right? But sometimes that's the way we have to communicate. Sometimes when you're super upset or super depressed, even, you don't want to have to think about how you're supposed to communicate. So you just let it flow. And the other person just listens and they act as a witness for that emotional dumping.
Take it personally, and they know it's not about, the witness knows it's not about them usually. I mean, it could be, but usually it's not. It's usually about the other person not being able to vocalize. I mean, at the very beginning, I didn't have communication tools. Like I said, in the vanilla relationship, it was who yelled the loudest, the longest, won. And that's not what we wanted in this one. But I found that for me, as I was going through different things, I couldn't figure out how to communicate. I would find myself kneeling and wanting to say, with all due respect, sir, I feel this way, when my head was like crazy spaghetti and I couldn't figure out what was causing it. And I needed to talk to him, but what was coming out was very aggressive. And so he created the porch time, and literally sacred space. We go out, we can rant, we can rave, but we know it's sacred space. We know that at the end of it, we are going to figure out a plan of action or something, right? And we knew we were creating it as a tool to help our dynamic. Now, some people can't do that. Some people, we tell about porch time and they're like, oh, hell no. We're not, my submissive is never going to talk to me like that, regardless of the situation. And that's where we pull in the talking stick. And it's like, okay, well, you can still have some sort of communication tool for those moments.
The key to porch time, though, to be effective is it has to be the exception. It has to be rare.
Right. It's
you know,
rare.
We've used porch time in 20 years, maybe we've used it about 5 times because you don't want to rely on that.
Right.
We rely on all the standard tools. We rely on me simply being able to say, no, we're going to do it this way.
We've learned other communication tools as we've grown
so that we continue to be in that power exchange relationship and tools and communication that relies on that as the foundation. But the nice thing with porch time is there is never a point where either one of us can say, well, I didn't know how to tell you that, because porch time is where you can say anything you want to say in any way you want to say. It's particularly effective as a leader because we have these silly models that leaders in power exchange relationships don't necessarily have negative emotions, right? That they don't get jealous, they don't get upset.
And you're always
Right.
confident. Exactly. Yeah. There's no space for vulnerability or just like being insecure about something, which is also, and that's why I think it's so very powerful I think you need to have a space where both of you can express, because we're not mind readers.
Yep. Absolutely.
To say that this is your biggest tip on creating a power exchange relationship for such a long time. And if not, what is your tip? What is the one thing that you say? Oh, you can both do another one, huh?
So Dan knows his, and I'll get stuck on porch time as ours because that's the most recent thing we've talked about. But I'm gonna say having a communication tool of some sort, because I have people that come to me and go, so how do you tell your dominant this thing? And I'm like, well, we have this. What communication tool did you build at the beginning? People don't know to do that, right? We just happen to fall into it. I don't know that our original contract doesn't say anything about porch time or a communication tool. It was all needs, wants, and desires. It was soon after that, when we were building into that volcano, that we learned to do that thing. So that's mine. It's always, I like having the contract and going through your needs, wants, and desires. And it's just a tool, right? It's just putting things in writing and having the communication tool that you're going to use if and when things get stressful.
See, you kind of stole mine a little bit, but
damn.
For me, it is especially effective if you are moving from an existing vanilla relationship or it's your first power exchange relationship. I'm a big fan. Write it down, right? We assume that we understand what we mean by these terms of leader and follower and submissive and all that kind of stuff. And we assume that we're going to remember, oh yeah, we have this thing called porch time and we have this and we have that. I'm a big fan of literally, and I personally, I know nowadays everybody wants to use their computers, but if you want to do it that way, fine. I like physically write down when I say punishment, this is what I mean by that. And to have Dawn to be able to respond by saying, yes, I acknowledge, I understand that, and I agree to it, right? Oh, so what you are literally saying and writing down is, if I misbehave in a way that is not in alignment with how we want to live, I want you to hold me accountable. And if that means punishment, then do that. That way it gives me it kind of gives me a permission to follow that authentic path. And I think for me, writing it down is just a lot more effective than just sitting across the table one day and having the conversation. Having the conversation is great, but heck, I met 12 people last night and I remember one name and I probably got that wrong. So let's not rely on my memory.
Right. And when we did our contract, we, like I said, we didn't have a lot of peers at this point, but or role models, but we wrote our contract as peers because I was already falling into the, oh my gosh, yes, sir, whatever you want, sir. Oh, you want me to do this? And, I was already falling into that energy of just wanting to obey. So I had to really step back and look at what is it? Needs, wants, and desires. What is non-negotiable? What is negotiable? What is, and it took me a couple of months to really dig into that and write things down and journal about it and, and all this stuff, trying to figure out what it was I want. So we did that as peers and then reviewed it. What is that?
Can you tell us a bit, tell me a bit about, because you're human beings, you're 20 years older, 20 years wiser. You cannot tell me that you didn't change. How did you do that with a contract? How do you do that?
So with our contract, we actually reviewed it. We realized it's not stagnant. It's a dynamic document.
Yeah.
So we would review it because it was so new. We reviewed it once a month, like a page of it, because it was a couple of pages. I write a lot. And then every year we totally redid it.
Yeah.
So we would look at it again and see what worked and see how we grew and what experiences we had. After 6 years, we realized we weren't really changing it much anymore, that we had kind of settled into a thing, a foundation that worked for us. And so now we don't particularly have anything in writing.
We're at this point, right now that we've built the foundation, we're pretty comfortable. Dawn's got enough trust and faith in me now that if I say, oh, by the way, at this point, we're going to sell the condo and sell the motorcycles and buy an RV and go live on the road.
With only 2 weeks notice, and we got it done in 6 weeks. Yeah.
She'll, she can flow with it because she has that trust and confidence in me that if it's the dumbest idea ever, I'll still take responsibility for it and get it fixed.
Which is really awesome too, because that's really challenging and which is really so powerful for your relationship, that once you make this decision and I mean, you need to trust him that he's taking into account your needs and wants and desires. And then to be able to make that decision is so powerful. This is really something in the heart of submission.
And it's through experience that I'm able to do this, right? So, I mean, mistakes that he's made at the beginning of our relationship, I've seen how he handles it, right? I've seen how he's taken responsibility for it. And because leaders do make mistakes sometimes, right?
Nay.
Yeah, that's and I still have an issue. Sometimes this trust was a big thing for me. And for me, it's still, I mean, I trust him with my life and I can say that, but in practice, sometimes things happen, he pushes a button and everything closes and it's like, oh, I don't know what you meant with that, but that cannot be good. And which is coming from distrust, and it's all within me, but it's something that we need to handle. So, and
hopefully, I was just gonna say, hopefully what your experience is in the 5 years is, that shutting down lasts at the beginning, it lasts quite a while, and then you have to reestablish things. And as time goes by, at least our experience is that if I do something, and I do make mistakes, if I screw up bad,
you still do.
Dawn's reset time becomes shorter and shorter and shorter until it's almost
and I'm aware.
To the point of
exactly. You're aware also, so that's something that you can discuss and create. Guys, if you're watching this, Dan and Dawn, they wrote a book about it. It's called Hearts and Colors. I hope you brought a copy so you can show, because mine didn't arrive on time. Yes. And it's chock full with very, very powerful, how do you say? Because it's personal stories, but there's always a lesson in it. So they're talking about how they messed up and how they figured it out and how they managed to find a way for them together. Anyway, I was talking about that everyone should buy your book. The link will be here below, so just order it, everyone, together with my own book. But this one is really, if you want to know how to get your power exchange relationship thriving for so many years, then this is definitely your way to go. Why did you write the book anyway? Because you wrote more books. And this is a very personal one.
I've been very fortunate to be asked to present around North America throughout the years. And what we find is we generally get asked the same kind of questions.
Yeah.
So we said, well, let's write that down. And writing down the question, the response, and it's not that we're writing down the question per se, but people ask us, how did you get past whatever it is, when you as a leader make a mistake, or you're changing bodies as you get older, right? All these kinds of interesting things, right? We would take our experience. Here's our experience with that, and here's how we dealt with it. And what we realized is we started to realize, well, this is a lot of stuff. We should just slap it into a book.
Mm.
We've done that both with the power exchange and with the polyamory as well. Hearts and Collars was where we sat back, and after 20 years, what we really did was we looked at our relationship, because as I said, this is what we do. We're growth-based people.
Mm-hmm.
And we asked that question, do we still need power exchange as part of our life?
Oh, at 20 years we did. Dan's like, so let's talk about this. Do we still need power exchange in our life? And I'm sitting here like, whoa, where's this coming from? Changes. And
Very valid.
right. So
And it's not because I had any doubt. It's not because anything wasn't working, but it is to recognize one of the problems was I started to like onions. And the reason this is going somewhere.
Oh yeah, I know. Peeling off layers.
No, this is literally, I was starting to enjoy the flavor of onions. And I said for the last 30 years, I hate onions.
Okay.
And then one day, for whatever reason, onions was in, like, well, I kind of like onions. And what I find is that just because you've done something for 20 years doesn't mean it's still true.
That's
right. I wanted to make sure that we weren't in a power exchange relationship out of habit at this point, that it was still the best path for us, for our personal growth. So we sat back and we really started to examine everything. And we said, wow, as we're examining these kinds of things, let's write some of it down. And that's kind of inspired Hearts and Collars to become the book that it is. The other aspect of it is that in the 20 years, my views on some things have changed. I am a lot more, I don't know, thorny about what a good leader is versus the kind of leaders we see that just want to get.
Oh, you're trying to say judgmental.
No.
No, we'll go with thorny.
More,
I have no clue what thorny is. My
just
English is
more,
pretty good, but this I don't know.
more like, for example, you might go onto a social media site like FetLife, and some guy who's 20 years old says, oh, I've got 3 slaves and I'm a big slave master, and blah 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 blah.
But I live in mom's basement.
So part of it was, if you are going to be a good leader, you must take responsibility for
Over
yourself.
your own
If you're
life.
going to be a good leader, you must take responsibility for that other person. And to find my
Yeah, I
voice.
think
and be
this
able-
also goes for submissives.
and we have
Absolutely.
that part as well. But to be able to express our voice on that as what we believe, after 20 years of experience, was really powerful for us to be able to do.
Yep.
It's not to say we're right. You take what you want and leave the rest. But the flip side is, this is 20 years of experience. There's probably something valuable in there.
So we're very adamant about teaching, talking, writing about our experience, not necessarily about what's right and wrong, just
Exactly.
what's worked for
Say
us.
what I
And
mean.
that's part of the reason we write in Dan Says, Dawn Says, because there's some stuff on my side of the slash as a submissive that Dan just doesn't get. Some of the processing, he's just not going to get as a leader. He doesn't think that way. And I don't necessarily need him to think that way. And there's things that he has to say that I totally don't get. And we weren't able to combine the voices because it doesn't make sense. So we're able to talk about our own experiences on each side of.
No. Oh. Do you never get tired from being the leader, Dan?
We realized fairly quickly in that, and really over the first couple of years, that it is important for leaders to be allowed to take breaks. And there are times where there's never a time where I'm not Dawn's leader, but there are times where I'm saying, I don't want any decisions to be coming my way for the next 2 days. I'm going to go off. We happen to be polyamorous as well. I have alternative relationships. So I'm going to go off, or I'm going to go backpacking by myself.
Meditation retreats.
Or a
You've done that.
meditation retreat, or I just want to be left alone for a little bit so that I can look internally and recharge. Dawn knows me well enough to, you know, if I tell her you're on autopilot for the next 3 days, I don't want anything coming my way because I'm recharging. It doesn't mean I'm going to come home and there's going to be 4 new pet cats, right? She still has to maintain the leadership that I've left.
Yes.
But it absolutely, you do get tired, you do get burned out, and it's essential to take care of yourself so that that doesn't impact the relationship.
Absolutely.
But I think that's for people in general. And we're very upfront with saying we're introverts. We need to recharge as people, but also in our roles. I'm getting ready to do a women's retreat in 2 weeks where I'm going to take 4 days off, not have my phone. Not, and it's not that I won't be in his follower role, right? But there won't be any texting, there won't be any orders. Yeah, so I need a couple days off to recharge.
All right. Yeah. Wonderful.
On a complete side note, we talked about how I like onions, how we're always reevaluating, I've decided I'm no longer an introvert. I'm not going to use that word anymore.
No,
That's a very good decision. Wonderful.
I think that it is self-limiting, but
Absolutely.
that's got nothing to do with this podcast or this
No,
show.
but that's very powerful, and I'm curious to see what it brings you.
I'm kind of curious, if you were an extrovert, would you say I'm not an extrovert anymore, that's limiting me? Because I think people look at introverts and think it's a negative thing instead of oh, this is what I need to recharge or whatever.
But the point, it's about accountability and about because it's saying I take responsibility for how I'm behaving. If you say I can't help it, I'm an introvert, which is in a way what you do say, like I'm an introvert, so I need to recharge. If I'm an extrovert and I say I'm a huge extrovert. I mean, I'm in disc. I'm like red and yellow on top. I use it and I say like, I'm sorry, yeah, I'll be blunt, but that's because I'm an extrovert and I'm I'm dominant in my personality. That's in a way I'm using it as an excuse. So yes, I can also, I also at one point decided I'm not going to use that anymore, that I'm yellow or red or.
One of us should start a psychology podcast and we'll talk about that later, but.
Oh, that would be very interesting. But in a way, it's what I'm doing. I mean, I don't know if you recognize, but I talk about disc. I'm talking about spirituality. I believe that submission is so far the fastest way towards enlightenment that I've found so far. So
sure.
Yep.
So yeah, absolutely wonderful. Dan, what is a leader? If you describe
the short version of it is somebody that takes responsibility for the relationship. That doesn't mean I don't take input, but I do take responsibility. If things go poorly, I step up and figure out what needs to be fixed. If things go well, I say, oh, good, we can build on that because something good is happening here. It is a matter of being able to, which is not one of my best, you didn't used to be a great skill, I've gotten better at it, to not micromanage and to hand off certain tasks and say, I want you to do this thing from now on, and I want you to do it this way, and then to get out of the way. Right now, part of power exchange is I have to stick my nose in every once in a while and say, oh, good job, you're doing it the way I want you to do, or nope, I could do this, you could do this a little bit better. But it's about giving people that opportunity to serve, letting them be of service. There's really not much more to it than that. Be responsible, lead yourself, right? A good leader has to have some self-awareness, has to be able to handle themselves, has to be able to recognize, we talk about fighting and getting angry. I've got to be the person that recognizes my emotions have become out of control. I need to resolve that. Sometimes it's harder than others, but it's got to be something that you've developed the skill to do. It's a person that continually is going to push growth for themselves and for their partner. We're not static people. If we wanted to be static people that sat around and, watched TV for 4 hours a night and then had missionary sex once a month, that's who we were. It's somebody who can make the hard decisions, but also gets out of the way of. It's somebody who lets their dog get away with all kinds of crap.
No.
Apparently,
That was so cute. You've got two submissives here. There's two with two. Okay, so please continue.
that is enough. That is it.
You say that you take responsibility for the relationship as a leader. Does it mean that the submissive does not take responsibility for the relationship?
The submissive's primary role is to take care of me so that I can take care of the relationship. Now, that doesn't mean she doesn't have relationship responsibilities, but they are the relationship responsibilities that I have assigned versus, I don't expect anything beyond that.
You're talking a lot about empowerment, both of you.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound very empowering.
I personally view it as completely empowering because I give Dawn the courage and the ability to go do the things that she needs to do, that I know she needs to do. A good example of that is at one point, Dawn said, I want to be a clergy person. Right. But it was said with the small voice of, oh, it would be nice one day is to be a clergy person. I have to continue to recognize she's ready. She's got what she needs, but she doesn't have the courage to go do it and to say, you will go do it.
And it wasn't in a path that's mainstream, right? So it was a non-mainstream spiritual path that I wanted to do this in. So it's not like I could just go to a seminary or some sort of university and learn about it, right? The opportunities to follow this path were very rare. And then this opportunity came up. And I'm like, oh, this would be so perfect. It's not online. It's actually close by, but I don't want to leave you. I take care of you and all this thing. And Dan pretty much kicked my ass out the door. So he's like, you will go. You are ready. This chance might not happen again.
Yeah, it's the funny thing is one of the subtle things I guess I do is simply give Dawn either the motivation or the courage to do the things that she needs to do. One of the things that a leader, here's one of our secret superpowers for a good leader, in my opinion, is we take what I can hear what Dawn actually wants and needs, regardless of whether she says I want or need, right? To hear that path and to push her along that path.
So I've learned to really think about what I say. Dan will take it and push. But what I have learned, so think about how that has actually helped me while we're here in Arizona, because a workshop opportunity opened up 3 hours away that I've wanted to do for 20 years, right? We've always been far away. It's been too expensive to fly in. It's been too expensive to do. I'm close enough. I can drive to it. And it's like, if not now, when? This is something I've wanted to do. So I'm going to go do it. And it's a women's empowerment thing. And I asked Dan's permission, but he didn't have to push me.
Right.
To do it. I'm able to go out and grab it.
And that's one of the really cool, subtle things that have happened over the past 20 years, where when Dawn and I first got together, Dawn needed to be in a relationship with me. She needed a stable relationship. She needed
a guide,
a guide, right? Here it is 20 years later. She doesn't need me anymore, right? She wants to be with me in a power exchange relationship.
That's so much more awesome. If we're talking clergy, I mean, that's free will.
Right.
You have to stay with me. So, okay, then I'll stay. That's not really fun. Exactly.
But at this point, if I end up being a bad leader, if I end up making stupid choices, Dawn's able to say, psh, psh, I'm out. I don't need your leadership. She is now here because she wants my leadership, because she trusts my leadership. And at this point, I can hear it when Dawn says, oh, I'm thinking about doing this workshop and I don't know. she's already made decisions. She wants to do the workshop. She barely needs a nudge anymore. I'll say something like, oh, cool. I'll stock me up with some frozen burritos before you go. So I got something to eat, which is silly, right? Because I've something
You
like
can
that,
take
right?
care of yourself
I
as
can take
well,
care of
yes.
myself. I support you going to do these things. And then as you bring back, right, all the growth that Dawn brings back, and here's the tricky answer to what you asked earlier about Dawn taking care of the relationship. Well, she brings this new thing into our relationship, whether it's a new skill or her own self-confidence or sexual growth or all the stuff makes the overall relationship better, right? So I get to, as the leader, I get to say I'm in charge of the relationship, but Dawn's constantly bringing better and more stuff into it to make our relationship and the us a better thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something that I think that for me is really important, that I'm also responsible for our relationship. Or in the I'm definitely submitting, but I do feel that responsibility. So how's that for you then, Dawn?
So it's hard to explain, but being his follower is my seat of power. When I fall into old habits and feel like I am taking charge again, I'm not happy. He's not happy. We're not in a happy place. We work well together, him leading, me following. So, and that's just, I try to tell people, it's not all about being submissive and not having any voice and things like that, though it could be. That's a valid relationship. We just talked about that on the podcast with some friends of ours. And but for me to follow and know that he's got my best interest at heart, that's my seat of power. So, and sometimes that, just to feel that seat of power, sometimes it just means obeying, right? When sometimes people will ask me, and we use different language here, right? We use a lot of leader follower because there's academic papers being written right now, and that's the language that they're using so that people will hear it, right? When you use master, slave, dom, sub, sometimes people won't hear it. So, but language wise, sometimes people ask me, how do you know if you're submissive? How do you know if you're a slave? And for me, at the beginning, I always asked a lot of questions in my head. Dan says, fix me a cup of coffee. Dawn says in our head, wait, should I be fixing him a cup of coffee? I think that's a thing I'm supposed to do. Wait a minute, I'm a woman that's supposed to be empowered. I should be saying, get your own coffee. Wait, his ex-wife used to do that, and I thought it was, all of that. And to me, that's submissive because you're still asking those questions. Nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And then one day I realized I wasn't asking those questions anymore. He said, get me a cup of coffee. Yes, sir. And I knew how to fix it, and I knew how he wanted it, and I served it with obedience, and I loved handing him the cup of coffee, and I loved his look when I handed him the cup of coffee, and everything was, and that to me was that step into slave. And but that happiness is where the empowerment comes from, I think. I'm rambling now, so I'll get into my trying to figure things
very
out.
Powerful. I actually really enjoyed it. Was new for me to talk about leader and following. For me, it totally resonates because following is an active act, and submitting is also an active act. It's being a submissive is like a static thing, and being a follower means that I need. So my submission is like, so that's how I take responsibility, is in being the follower. So it's what you say. For me, I'm not that far as you are. Of course, we're on a distance. So I have a whole life without that. He's not controlling. It's not possible otherwise. And I also have kids that he's not in control of my kids. So sometimes it takes me time to get back. But for me, sometimes it's really tough, and I need to make a real decision all the time to submit. And that's my responsibility in the relationship. Next to that, of course, also for us, we're still exploring how to do that. So we have a bit more porch time probably than you have, but we need those a little bit more.
Sure.
We're all the time experimenting and figuring it out. Yeah, wonderful. That's really awesome. That's fantastic. Yeah, I would like to, it's not exactly about the, but I would like to learn a little bit more about polyamory, because for me, that's really, I mean, I was in open relationships a lot, and I didn't do that right. I was in a relationship with a guy, and I told him, I'm only going for an open relationship because otherwise I can tell you I cheat. That was my, so I said, okay, that sounds fun. Yeah, that was awkward. If you look at it, and it's also why it clashed, of course, because I was having a relationship, always a relationship next to it, but I didn't tell, because I told him also, I don't want to know what you're doing. And he
Mhm.
said the same, exactly. And I mean, it was like he could access my phone and my email and everything. I said, I don't have secrets for you, but it's up to you if you want to figure it out. And he couldn't take it the moment that he figured it out.
Okay.
Now I have a relationship, and the guy says, it's all fine, Mary, you're not going to have any other relationships. Suddenly it means I found out that it's totally possible to be monogamous. But I'm just, because I saw in the book that in the beginning, when you actually bought a house together, there was a third person,
Mhm.
a vanilla person. So would you be willing to share a bit about that and some lessons from that on, because for me, polyamory is still very complex and yeah, scary.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. That was about, I don't know, 10
10
years
years
in.
in.
Dawn and I were already in a long-term in 10 years into our relationship. We both have other polyamory relationships that aren't power exchange per se, at least at that time.
Can I explain a little bit?
Sure.
So at the beginning, one of the things, like you said, you told your partner it has to be open because you'll cheat otherwise, right? We'd actually had that discussion at the beginning as well. So when we did our designer relationship, we knew it's going to be something kinky, something with power exchange, even though we didn't know the language specifically for it. We knew it was going to be open in some way, even though polyamory wasn't really a word that was known much back then. And so we knew we were going to do all these things. So we went into it again with no role models. So it was a little choppy to begin with the power exchange and the polyamory mixing in and openness and stuff like that. So yeah, we've gone through a lot of the challenges, maybe the first 10 years where we really did it together. And then Karen comes along in my spiritual group. Her and her husband had joined, and we started out the four of us dating. And then me and the husband realized that just wasn't going to work for us. But Dan and Karen had fallen in love. And Karen's vanilla, and it kind of worked from there. So there's the beginning synopsis.
And that worked out all right for me to have a vanilla girlfriend.
I was confused.
I'm not anti-vanilla, but I was already being fed. My power exchange aspects were already being fed. So having somebody who was not in a power exchange relationship, and it was she wasn't my full-time relationship in that we didn't live together, so it wasn't a big deal to have that vanilla aspect.
And you
to
like
myself.
adventure.
And I like new and interesting things. And
I need power exchange.
So after a couple of years of that, we realized that at this point, Karen lived less than a mile from us. We as a threesome, we got this dog, right? Because Dawn and I both travel a lot. So it's like, well, we can't have a dog. And Karen, has a lot of responsibility. She can have a dog, but if the three of us had a dog, there'd always be somebody to watch her. And we live less than a mile from her, and we're both paying rent on an apartment. It was like, why don't we just
our rents were going to go up.
Why don't we just get a big house and all live in a big house together? And we happened to find this wonderful house that had
a husband,
among other.
Her husband was in it too then?
No, at this point, her and her husband had already broken up.
Okay.
Unrelated reasons.
We're all still friends. We're friends with him and his new wife, and
yeah.
Uh-huh.
So we found this wonderful house with two separate, completely built separate kitchens, two really separate halves of one big house. So
it was amazing.
Dawn and I maintained our relationship pretty much as it was, but now you go through this door, literally. There's a door, and then my other relationship with Karen was right there. And it really didn't change that much. I mean, the dog benefited from the most because she could run him
Yeah, she
back
could
and
run
forth
in
all
and-
day
exactly.
long.
You could run
Yeah.
back and forth too. You just had to remember what side you were on.
Exactly.
So
But how do you
So we-
figure out what kind of, how do you, I mean, I mean, yeah, to me, I would think that's challenging. How do you make arrangements for that? How do you make it work?
a lot of talking,
that.
because one of my fears is that Dan was going to expect me to serve Karen.
Right.
And that was not my agreement when we got together, for me to serve anyone else. So we sat down as peers. And of course, I knew Karen, of
Mhm.
4 years at that point when we did this. And so we sat down as peers. And after we moved in together, we sat down almost every Sunday as peers for a couple of hours to go
Yeah.
over household
Three.
stuff. The three of us.
Yeah, the three of us. Right. We sat in a kind of communal room. We went through logistics, right? We went through the calendar. Who's making dinner? Are
Who's
we
got the
eating
dog?
tonight? Who's
Yeah.
got the dog? But a lot of it was just, how is this working for everybody, right? Is there some conflicts? Is there some, anybody having any challenges? And it was another, mostly a peer space for Dawn, in that she needed to be allowed to speak her mind, but she continued to do so as my respectful follower.
I mean, I was peer with Karen, his follower, but I was allowed to speak up during those times and expected
Right.
to speak up.
And if we voted on something like, what color do you want to paint the fence? Right. We didn't do the power exchange flex where I get 2 votes, right? To Karen's one. Right? Dawn got her
That would be
own personal
nasty.
vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
it was,
I imagine that it's also kind of awkward then suddenly, because then there is no power exchange in it. But also things like suppose that you and Karen get into a fight. Huh? I mean, I would that it's not a good thing then to run to the other, right? This kind of stuff
Right.
happens sometimes, right?
right. So if Dan and Karen got into a fight because they're peer, they didn't have the "thou shalt not yell at me" thing.
You have that?
It would affect me because I don't know how to fix this because it's their thing.
And it's not in your relationship, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. But I want to take care of him because that's what I do. So that we had to talk about that. If me and Karen, I don't remember me and Karen ever getting into a fight. We would have differences of opinions. Did we want, please don't bring it up now because I don't want
It's
to
a little
remember.
one.
Is it a little one? Okay.
But it's a great example, so I am going to bring it up.
Okay. So because you guys were together for 12 years.
Yeah. When we first got the house together, in the first month or so, there was a thing over the fire.
that
What do you call
one.
those things over
The
the fire?
mantle.
A mantle over the fireplace.
It was Christmas time, I
And
think.
we put some stuff up there, and Karen put some stuff up there.
That was the communal room. So
Right.
we did yeah.
And if I remember correctly, one day the stuff that Dawn put up there was taken
Was
down,
gone.
and Karen put new stuff up there.
For Christmas.
And Dawn was upset about that because she felt like, well, this is supposed to be a communal room, not another Karen room. It was the same philosophy with the Sunday meeting. We sat down and we talked about, I noticed this thing. It's upsetting to me. Let's talk about it. Karen explained, oh, I thought this and that. Dawn said, well, in the future, let's do that. Boom. It's not that big a deal.
So
there was
you
a couple of
also
days.
had a communication tool to make sure that the 3 of us was going to work. So you had like a weekly meeting or something for that?
Exactly that. Every
Wonderful.
Sunday we would
Yeah.
sit there. Now, those couple of days leading up to Sunday were a little contentious.
Yeah.
But
with Karen not knowing why I
Right.
was upset because I hadn't brought it up yet, right? I'm trying to work it out going, Dawn, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal. No, it's a big deal. I need to not feel like I'm being stepped on because I'm the submissive.
And you're allowed to be heard. That's
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But we talked about it and I don't remember, that was near the beginning.
Yep.
And I don't really remember much else going on like that,
No.
argument wise. Karen was also really good about wanting things to work and wanting to be with Dan and understanding our relationship. And yeah, so that worked out really well.
And that's one of the props, that we would have to give to Karen is that
Mhm.
when I very first started dating her, I had to
Ooh,
explain what
things were
power
rough.
exchange was. right? She had no clue what it was. And I said, well, this is one of the realities of my life. If you're going to date me, this is one of the realities you have to accept. And she got on board with that. She understood it. She asked questions. Karen and I had occasional disagreements, but I would never date anybody that fights or argues or raises their voice. It's just not something I would be interested in having in my life. It happens every once in a while, but like I said, it's a lot. We're human every once in a while, but if we're fighting every couple of weeks,
periods.
I've heard. So I've heard. But if we're fighting every couple of weeks, or if we're fighting over dumb stuff, like I told you to take the garbage out, it's just not going to be a relationship I'm going to be in anyway.
Thank you for giving
Sure.
this beautiful insight.
It was a beautiful thing. The house lasted 5 years. Karen decided the relationship I had with Karen lasted 12 years. The last half was in the house together. And after 5 years, Karen decided she had a new path. She wanted to go try something called monogamy. I said, whoa, that sounds scary, but feel free. And there was no big deal. She said, I want to go try this thing with one of my boyfriends, and away she went. And we sold the house. And
I miss the hot tub. I miss the shared dinners, though the shared dinners at first were confusing as well, because we would usually have it on her side of the house. She had the bigger kitchen, the bigger dining room. And I'm wanting to serve Dan by pulling his dishes away, but I don't want to serve her. And then sometimes Dan would get up and get all the dishes because he
feels very awkward for you. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. We figured it out, but
I can imagine that's stuff that you need to think about. Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. I would like to ask you, because I asked you actually to come up with a beautiful assignment, and then you said that you had an assignment, or you had actually a beautiful thing to re-establish a power exchange relationship. Would you like to share?
Yeah, it is not uncommon for Dawn and I were in multi-year relationships before starting a power exchange relationship. So it's not uncommon to slip into complacency and slip into those old vanilla habits.
And media, I mean, we don't have a lot of power exchange that we see around us, right? We have media is usually vanilla, blah, blah, blah.
When I find that the relationship is becoming unbalanced, what I will literally do is I will tell Dawn to shush. I will ask her to be quiet, right? Which already starts to bring up the neat thing. When I tell Dawn to be quiet, is the first thing we see come up is, oh yeah, you're going to tell me to be, oh, that's right, I'm supposed to listen to you. All right. And she'll I won't say bite her tongue. Yeah, I will say that. She'll be, and then maybe a simple hand in the hair, not grabbing or anything like that, but just a simple hand in the hair to recognize, and maybe even saying something like, you're mine, or maybe a finger in the collar, like that, and just be quiet for a little bit with that simple physical reminder of what our connection's about. This is a great one. This collar is 22 years old, right? And
he'll tell me to breathe.
And I'll tell her to breathe, and I'll breathe as well. And we'll sit there and breathe a little bit together with this physical connection. And then I will make a statement of fact, some kind of a leadership thing. I will say, since we're nice and quiet now, why don't you tell me what's going on? Or if things are really wonky, I'll point out this power exchange relationship works very well for us, doesn't it? Yes. And then I'll give her a little squeeze. Say that again. Yes, sir. Yeah. And because this power exchange relationship works very good for us, we have to be careful not to slide into complacency, don't we?
Yes, sir.
Are you okay? Is everything okay? Anything upsetting or driving you to not being able to serve me properly?
No, sir.
Good. Then go get my peanut butter sandwich and cut off the little crumbs, or cut off the crust, because I feel like having a little baby sandwich today.
Yes, sir.
Good. Or go down on me, you little slut. You know, that's
that works too.
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, but that's wonderful. Thank you. That was
Sure.
very insightful again. Wonderful.
Good.
Well, I would like to round up. I want to thank you a lot